Hello and welcome to Pagabo Live, our initiative designed to promote knowledge in the public sector. My name's Tom, and over the next hour, we'll be talking about the findings of Pagabo's recent white paper on the government's house building targets with our panel of industry experts who are asked to introduce themselves now, starting with Mike.
Good afternoon, all. I'm Michael Baggett. I'm Director of Land and Partnerships at Platform Housing Group. So, Platform are a registered housing provider. We own and manage around 50,000 plots across the Midlands, and we are a strategic partner of Homes England.
Super. Next, Ellie.
Hi, I'm Ellie Cass. I'm Head of Strategic Built Environment Growth at SLR Consulting, a sustainability consultancy. I'm also a Chartered Town and am currently serving as Chair of the Board of the Royal Town Planning Institute. I therefore spend my time sitting right at the junction between policy intent and delivery reality, be that local plans, infrastructure alignment, viability, design, and social and environmental outcomes. Thank you.
Super, a highly qualified commentator for today's webinar. And finally, Chris.
Afternoon all, Chris Wheeler, National Head of Development for Willmott Dixon. We are a renowned Tier 1 contractor, but I work within our development arm. We've had a number of kind of iterations over the last number of years. However, predominantly over the last kind of 6 to 10 years, I've worked in the business facilitating development with our local authority and public sector customers.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, all of you. Today's event is a panel discussion, so we're going to be talking about the report's findings on the key barriers to delivery, the sector's readiness to meet demand, and how it can be done while balancing those trio of challenges of sustainability, quality, and cost. We'd also love it if you as the audience can get involved, so please feel free to ask us as many questions as you like using the Q&A box. Should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen or hiding behind the more icon as well at the bottom. So if you can put your questions in there, we'll try and get at least 10 minutes at the end to put them to your panelists. We're also going to run our usual polls during today's session where we'll get your views on the topics that we're discussing. But we're going to start off with going through some of the insights from the report and also going to our panel with a question based on each of those. So the research in the report has shown that 70%, a really strong majority of the respondents, believe that the 1.5 million homes target from the government is overly ambitious. So I'm going to ask all of our panelists, and we'll start with Ellie because she's top of my screen at the moment. From where you sit, is this target still genuinely achievable, or are there fundamental enabling parts of the process missing?
Thank you. I think the commitment to the planning system and its reform to deliver the 1.5 million has never been so high on the agenda, and the government has been listening to the industry and responding through the plethora of consultations since and reforms since coming into office. I think this is resulting in really positive change in terms of things like SDS and a return to strategic planning. But policy alone is not going to deliver the 1.5 million homes. I think the sector's sentiment is telling, but doesn't mean that we lack ambition. It means that people are diagnosing the gaps between the targets and the enabling conditions. So is it achievable? Potentially, but only with a whole system delivery programme and not just a headline for the numbers. From my lens, in terms of the chair of the RTPI, the fundamentals are still misaligned. I think we lack long-term investment certainty. Planning capacity remains critically stretched, and infrastructure doesn't yet lead development at scale. And then we've obviously got critical supply chain issues and skill shortages throughout the process. So in summary, I think we've got the capability and talent, but we need to have these enabling conditions resolved. Thanks.
Yeah, that's some very good points there, Ellie. And Chris, from your position in sort of you are in the sort of the contract account, but also mainly in your role, the development side of things as well. How do you see the target and whether we are still missing some of those key enablers?
I'll share many of the points that Ellie made, to be fair. I think the aspiration to deliver 1.5 million homes is fantastic. It's one that we share, and I think the majority of professionals in the industry share that aspiration to be able to deliver that magnitude. I don't think that's been delivered since post-war Britain, unfortunately, and I think we live in a very different world now. The regulatory world that we sit in is restricting the amount of homes that we can deliver, and the type of homes. So we're seeing almost a post-BSA HRB world where we're all trying to get schemes below 18 metres, which doesn't help that. And I don't think we have the resource in the industry, unfortunately, whether that be from a professional perspective, a contracting perspective, or also a funding perspective at the moment. I don't think, given the restrictions we have, that it is achievable, unfortunately. But I hope to be proven wrong there.
And Mike, your views on this, please. I know it's something that was a subject very close to your heart as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone agrees the target is ambitious. However, I think positively we're seeing sort of continued positive steps being taken to try and boost new supply. So whether it's steps to reform planning, whether it's things like the new Towns Task Force or the incoming social and affordable homes programme that's recently been announced through Homes England, these are positive steps that are being taken. I think from a housing provider's point of view, it's clear to me that the RPs can play a critical role in terms of meeting those targets. And I think our contribution will be vital, not just in terms of volume, but also in terms of sort of creating stability, social equity, and long-term housing resilience.
Yeah, here. We'll move on to our next insight now, and it'd be good to get. We'll go to Mike on this first, actually, but then also Chris, who has a strong foot in the funding camp in his role. So the long-term funding certainty was cited by, again, 3/4 of respondents as being the biggest single unlock for housing delivery, the biggest thing that can unlock the challenges that we're faced at the minute. So what specific funding reforms would you like to see, Mike, and then Chris, on what would actually kind of change the behaviours on the ground and help us get towards that target?
Yeah, I think we can all agree without having sustainable funding streams, it's very difficult to continue to deliver and to upscale that delivery. I think in terms of the affordable housing sector, access to sustainable funding streams is critical. We, as a sector, have been calling for a longer term funding commitment for some time now. And thankfully, I think that the Social and Affordable Homes programme is providing that long-term certainty that the sector's been calling for. I think having that 10-year commitment, the pledge for the 39 billion over that period kind of enables multi-year delivery programmes. It's designed to support not only those that are aspiring to deliver larger pipelines for delivery, but then also those that are seeking to bid on a CME basis. So I think, from a positive point of view from the RP sector, it's exactly the commitment that we've been looking for, and will help to significantly accelerate the affordable housing sector and the wider construction industry. I think away from that, what we've also seen is a more sporadic approach. So we've been, either ourselves or with partners, we've been successful in terms of securing pockets of additional funding that's available to unlock, whether it's particularly constrained sites, brownfield that might be, and they've been really successful in terms of delivery. But it is inconsistent where the funding streams are. And I think it would be really positive if we could see greater consistency in terms of that sort of supplemental bespoke funding to unlock difficult sites. Yeah,
that certainty is a real big challenge in this specific issue. Chris, you guys obviously you work with a variety of different kind of funding models for developments that you work on with Willmott Dixon. But what do you see as those key reforms and the funding side of things that would change the way that that housing is delivered? I think you're on mute there, Chris.
Sorry, guys, it's only been 6 years of Teams, isn't it?
Not the first, and you won't be the last.
Evidently, we're in a pressured market at the moment, and obviously something that can't be fixed through reforms are interest rates. We're seeing that as a huge kind of blocker, especially for those customers that would typically be looking to retain an asset over a 30-40 year period. Previously, at relatively low interest rates, they're just not available at the moment. But in terms of funding reform, I think Mike really kind of hit the nail on the head, and it's great to see the latest affordable housing programme providing that kind of portfolio approach, and some of our customers being able to look at it on a long-term basis and get support from Homes England. We are seeing, however, that brownfield sites still are difficult to unlock, even with higher levels of grant or more surety around that grant. We'd like to see more kind of meaningful programs of BLRF through the OPE and some Homes England kind of intervention funding around infrastructure based more on a grant basis to deliver affordable housing. But with all that, we are seeing that it needs a kind of a cocktail of funding opportunity to allow schemes to come forward.
We've talked already about, we've certainly a strong mention of the way that planning is very much now front and center of some of the conversations, which it's not been the case for many years. But with planning reform high on the government agenda, many of the people in the sector who have responded to the research for this white paper still reporting some systemic barriers within the planning process overall. So we'll go to you first on this, Ellie, from a planning perspective. Where is the system still slowing development down the most?
Thank you. I think the biggest friction point remains operational reality, so capacity, skills, and consistency. We've got hard evidence on capacity in the government's planning capacity and skills survey, which shows that 91% of planning departments are reporting difficulties recruiting, 72% reporting difficulty retaining, and 97% reporting gaps, which we've talked about at some length before, Tom. And there's also critical gaps in some of the technical areas as well, particularly in ecology and biodiversity, master planning, design codes, which are exactly the areas where we're being asked for more information and we've got greater expectations on us. So, but all of those areas are important. So even with planning reform being high on the agenda, those systematic barriers are being seen firsthand by the profession. I think that leads to three delivery impacts, which we repeatedly see, and that is delay through undercapacity. So case officers are stretched, decision cycles are extended, delay through complexity. So we're needing more and more evidence, more interfaces and more negotiation, and delay through sequencing. So planning, utilities and infrastructure aren't necessarily aligned appropriately. So I think policy change alone won't fix speed. We need capability change, skills, capacity, digital tools as well, and a system that can support quality decisions which are made at pace, essentially. More investment.
Well, absolutely. And Mike, so from that delivery side of things, where are you seeing the challenges? Where do you feel the system's most slowing the process down?
Yeah, I think it's a similar experience, really. I think the system is set up to work efficiently when all parties are contributing and have the resource to be able to do that. It's a complex system, and we're seeing issues with under-resource. I read a stat the other day that only 20% of major applications were determined within the statutory period last year, which sort of shows that there is clearly some barriers to delivery. I think we've also experienced issues sort of post-determination. So when you're actually in the process of pre-construction or actual construction in terms of getting statutory approvals in place, whether that's road adoptions, drainage, etc. I think some of that also comes down to under-resource, but also kind of the complex multi-stage technical cycles that you have to go through as part of that process. And whilst that might not expressly delay a start on the site, we've seen examples where you might have delays in your program that has a cost impact, but also that critically stops you from taking occupations on your site, which is a real risk. What I would say though is that we operate over a vast geography, and we've seen some fantastic examples where you've got really dedicated officers who are very committed in terms of providing good robust advice and positively supporting applications through as quickly as possible. So I think that the people that we're working with day to day are committed and positive and proactive. I think it's just parts of the system, as Ellie's referred to, kind of are breaking those barriers down.
Excellent stuff. Well, that's a really good first segment from our panelists there, but we'd like to get your views as the audience on whether you think the government's target of 1.5 million homes this Parliament is achievable. So this poll should have popped up on your screens now, and you'll have around 30 seconds to answer it. But do you believe that the target is achievable? We've got a response of yes with current policy, yes, but only with significant reform, No, it's overly ambitious, and a final option of unsure. So we'll give that another couple of seconds. And while we're letting that run, just a reminder as well that you can submit your questions to our panel. We'll hopefully get around 10 to 15 minutes at the end of today's session to put those to our panel. So feel free to pop them into the Q&A box as soon as you want within this webinar, and we will make sure that we get those questions answered for you. Right, that looks like the end of the polls out there. So if we just close that and take a look at the results. So interestingly, none of those that responded think it is possible with current policy, which I do think kind of echoes what we've discussed on the panel here, that there needs to be some changes to the way things are approached. So 36% do believe it is still achievable with that significant change, but 60% of the audience, 6 out of 10, think that it is overly ambitious. So, and a couple just answering they're unsure. So generally, there's a pretty strong feeling that certainly, if nothing happens, this isn't going to be reached. But the overall feeling is fairly negative towards the target. We'll get into a little bit of kind of analysis of that towards the end in the Q&A session, because I'm sure that will come up from our audience. But we'll move on to our next insight from the white paper now, and we'll go to Chris on the question for this first. So the white paper has highlighted tensions around developer profit expectations and land values as being major barriers and blockers to the delivery of these houses. So we'll go to Chris first, as I say, but then we'd like to get Ellie's view on this as well. So how do you create a model where commercial reality and public need are better aligned? Because the developers do need to be seeing the commercial viability of these projects, don't they, Chris?
Certainly do, and it's not only kind of a need from our boards, but it's also a need from institutions where we're borrowing from, that will demand certain levels of overhead and profit and contingency within these schemes. I think where we can try and work together to make sure that we're all singing off the same hymn sheet and we have better alignment and commercial reality is making sure that we work in an environment that's well regulated, and we have good kind of foresight of where we are in terms of regulation. So we've been speaking for a number of years around kind of future home standard and the like. We're not quite there yet. And also around other sustainability requirements, Building Safety Act and the like. If we live in a world where we can foresee these changes, then land values can be set accordingly. In terms of other areas where we can align better with the public need, in terms of how we value schemes and how we appraise them. So are we looking purely at the bottom line, or are we looking at the benefit in kind that we're bringing to the area? So I think a broader understanding of the viability of schemes, particularly in the public sector, is needed, because often the VCR that we're delivering on certain schemes can be far in exceedance of another scheme that might be deemed more viable.
And Ellie, that word alignment has come up again in this question. How do we kind of align those twin factors there of that commercial reality and the public need for these houses to be built?
Yeah, I think, in practice, it's a tension that is often causing stop-starts on programs, and, is clearly a situation we're going to have to resolve. I think it needs to be more transparent, and there needs to be more early alignment in terms of land values, and not blame between parties. There's possibly 3 practical steps that might help, and one is pricing land on policy compliant outcomes rather than pricing them on a speculative upside and hoping that the market moves. I think setting viability rules much earlier in the game, and I know the government are talking about this, and having more consistency across the piece will help, which will obviously help master planning clarity at that early stage as well, and avoid hopefully renegotiation, and also rewarding that long-term placemaking performance. So rather than short-term schemes and economics, looking at infrastructure and stewardship and what those benefits are, which I think is talking to the same sort of area. And in the interim, we've talked as well about the need to perhaps revisit schemes so that we do get building. And if schemes like Bristol have just introduced, where they'll relook at Section 106s early in this sort of transitional time to ensure that there is some building going on are also going to be critical in that short term. But, for the longer term, I think we probably need to remember that a viable scheme isn't one that squeezes everything out of it. It's one that stands up and builds, and that there's got to be pragmatism and compromise between the various parties, because the most important thing is that we get houses and homes for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And moving on to the next insight, that kind of marries into that a little bit there, in that we've seen that from the report that housing associations seem significantly more likely to see refurbishment as a core priority than local government are. So we'll bring Michael in on this one first of all, but again, we'll get Chris's view on it as well. Is there a risk of this kind of a false choice being created between maintaining existing homes and building new ones, Michael?
I don't think it's a false choice. I think ultimately refurbishment and new supply need to be delivered in tandem if we're gonna hit targets. I think our philosophy as a housing association is that all of our customers deserve a safe, affordable, and sustainable place to live, regardless of the age or type of property. It is true that associations place a strong emphasis on improving existing stock. The NatFed strategic review in 2025 sort of highlighted the different and competing priorities that we are grappling with as a sector at the moment. That's the need to continue to improve our homes, responding to regulatory reform, meeting our commitments around decarbonisation and climate change, as well as delivering much needed new affordable housing. I think those dualing priorities can put pressure on, but for the sector, sort of our social purpose is about delivering new housing. So that's something that is always going to be a key priority for us. I think it's just being able to manage the two, really. I think if we're taking a 10-year view on funding, which is what the new Affordable Homes Programme is about, then maybe we should look at taking a longer term view on the investment into our new homes, particularly in the face of sort of recent regulatory change. I think that the government's delivering a decade of renewal talks about doing just that, really. It's about having funding to deliver new supply, but also that funding that's coming in for new supply being used then to increase borrowing capabilities, then to recycle into your existing stock. So I think there is positive change ahead, but I think it must be in tandem if it's going to work effectively.
Yeah, and Chris, how do you guys see this kind of this challenge being managed?
I totally agree with Michael. For us, it's around kind of a coherent housing strategy. So it's got to include both kind of decent homes and new homes to come in. The difficulty we're seeing is it's maintaining those homes up to the standard that we're bringing forward. So you've got tenants that are in a disparate kind of place in terms of kind of the energy bills that they're seeing and the quality of homes that they're living in. But that just requires a decent amount of funding to kind of bring that forward and make sure that we're all living in parity.
Excellent stuff. And we'll go on to, it's been touched on earlier around sort of brownfield and some of the challenges there. But one of the insights from the report is that more than half of the professionals who responded favoured a mix of brownfield and greenbelt delivery, despite the political sensitivities around greenbelt. I'll go to Ellie first with this question, because I know we've had multiple conversations about greenbelt, grey belt, etc., and how it all fits in together. But what does a genuinely pragmatic land strategy look like in practice?
Thank you. Yeah, greenbelt, my favourite topic, possibly. Well, I think the bottom line is we can't solve it, can we, through a single narrative in terms of which type of land we use. I think the pragmatic strategy has to be in practice to look at brownfield first, but where it's truly deliverable, with remediation and enabling funding that makes it viable. I think looking backwards at sites that haven't delivered is retrograde, and we need to think of something a little bit outside the box for those brownfield sites. And then secondly, selective and sustainable release where it's needed, focusing on locations with strong transport links and place potential, which clearly the NPPF is looking at with grey belt, and the priority for locations where there's sustainable rural stations. So it also, that approach provides people with more choice and access to countryside and things like that. There also needs to be more regional coordination as well in land allocations, and making sure that we're matching land allocations with places where there is infrastructure and capacity, labour, supply, utilities, and no other environmental constraints. So I think all of those things are really important for that strategy. And a balanced approach might also provide new opportunities in terms of cross-funding the greening of our cities. And we've talked about this before, where brownfield sites aren't viable. Perhaps grey belt sites can cross-fund them being turned into, city parks and things like that. So it actually improving the environment within our cities as well. So I think the test should ultimately be, when we're looking at sites, is can it be delivered quickly? Can it be delivered affordably? And can it be delivered with infrastructure and community benefits? And that cuts across all types of land. So you need that balance to ensure that we have enough land to deliver 1.5 million houses.
And Chris, Willmott Dixon works across a variety of different types of land on large scale developments and slightly smaller as well. So from your guys' perspective, what does a pragmatic land strategy look like?
I'd completely agree with that, Ellie, that it needs to be a balanced view. So I'm not going to sit here and say we can only build on brownfield, because I know that's not viable, and certainly not where people want to live in totality. But what I would say is the experience that we've got and our expertise is around brownfield estate regeneration, whether that's town centre and the like. And we're seeing, unfortunately, the decline of our high streets and this kind of surrounding suburbs, which we need to stem. So I think a policy that allows us to stem that and develop out those brownfield sites first, kind of helping reinvigorate the high street, whether that's through alternative use classes and residential or other areas, is certainly where we would see the government best put their pound, although, as I say, it will need that government intervention that we spoke about earlier in this call to allow that to be realised. But yeah, it's about a kind of balanced ideology, really, and making sure that we're delivering where it's needed and at pace.
Yeah, I think there's generally a consensus there in the panel, as there needs to be a pretty strong mix there. No one type of land is going to solve this issue that we're facing with delivering so many homes. We'll bring up the next poll, because we didn't get you guys to answer the one single thing, so we're going to get the audience to answer it instead. So what does the audience think the single biggest barrier to accelerating housing delivery in their organisation or region is? So speaking entirely of your organisation as a member of the audience, what are the challenges and barriers that you're seeing individually? So is it that long-term funding certainty that was mentioned earlier by Mike? Is it those planning and regulatory constraints that were covered off by Ellie? Is it the land availability and viability that falls into Chris's expertise? Or is it that infrastructure capacity, which we are going to go on to talk about in our questions slightly later on? So give you another few seconds to answer that, because I can see that responses are still coming in from our audience. In fact, plenty of responses still coming in from the audience. Great to see so much engagement. Okay, if we end that poll there and share the results, please. So I think that's probably about as balanced a poll as we've seen on Pagabo Live for some time, but there seems to be around a quarter of respondents agreeing that lack of long-term certainty on the funding side and also the planning and regulatory constraints are causing an issue. But that land availability and viability, the V word, which we all hear constantly at the moment, is the most popular response, but not by too much. So interesting to see a fairly balanced list of responses there. So we'll come back to that in our Q&A section later on. But we will now move on to the next question. So the insight that we've gained from the report is that local government respondents were 3 times more likely than housing associations to say that infrastructure significantly slows down delivery. So an interesting view there from the research that was done. But go to Mike on this one first. How do we better align that infrastructure investment with housing delivery to unlock that kind of faster build out that we're looking for?
Yeah, I think from our perspective as a housing association, it's probably slightly different to some of the others, because we retain that long-term stake in the community. I mean, away from investment, I think we are seeing the impact of delays for infrastructure delivery. So whether that's the point that I made earlier in terms of going through technical approvals just to be able to start constructing the infrastructure, but we work on a number of larger new town settlements, SUEs, where the delays to delivering community infrastructure often lead to questions around the sustainability of the scheme and those homes for our customers. So yeah, we've got a number of sites where we've seen community infrastructure buildings such as schools, community buildings, commercial, not being delivered at the same time as the housing units, and the impact that can have in terms of both demand and desirability, but also really from a kind of sustainability point of view, it's difficult for people to live in areas where they don't have that amenity immediately available to them. And I mean, I think from a sort of how do you solve the problem point of view, I mean, away from investment, I think definitely a move to a more place-based planning approach is kind of key in terms of that approach. It's about combining both the housing and the infrastructure delivery to make sure that they are working in tandem, but also making sure that there's strong collaboration with all stakeholders in that local area to look at design solutions that kind of are a more fit the specific context of the place rather than focusing purely on policy.
And Ali, you mentioned earlier around the sort of the sequencing element of the infrastructure and the utilities alongside planning. So is that where the alignment potentially needs to be better to help get these houses built?
Yeah, I think there's three shifts, isn't there, in terms of infrastructure-led planning. So infrastructure is the upfront element, and that might require some more creative thinking about how we split infrastructure costs against land uses. And we've talked about this before in other forums, because some of the other land uses might be more capable of carrying that cost early on than the housing elements. I think the element is if we can get to a point where infrastructure leads placemaking, and I don't mean roads, but all of those things they lead. You actually build in more value into your properties as you progress through the scheme because of the place that you create. I think looking at things as a single integrated pipeline, so housing, transport, utilities, schools, health, etc., and having them properly planned together with really shared milestones about when they're delivered, is also absolutely imperative. And I think scaled solutions and early stage enabling investment are absolutely key as well. And then probably we go back to data again, which is transparent capacity data. So we need to make sure that we're allocating in the right places where the utilities, etc., can be connected. And we need to ensure that the government, the agencies and the utility providers and other public bodies are all joined up in those discussions. So I think a lot of it's about partnership again, and people talking to each other at the right stage, an early stage. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the infrastructure needs to lead and not lag behind, and that will make a major difference.
Yeah, and that leads very nicely into the next insight that we've got from the report. In fact, our final one for today is that nearly 80% of the respondents to reports said that collaboration with bodies like the NHS and like education providers, those that do provide that infrastructure alongside the houses, is essential or important. So it'd be good to get the full panel's view on this. Actually, we'll go to you first on this one, Chris. What does that truly joined up place delivery look like, and who needs to step up first? Is there one group that needs to step up first, or is it a case of that pure collaboration?
We've always seen some of this collaboration. We've seen some great examples of it through One Public Estate. We've certainly done some work through Oxfordshire and the like, and we're taking those best practices elsewhere in the country. But I think it works best in a public-private partnership where you have both of the parties there that are required to deliver homes at pace and places at pace, but also the political knowledge and ability to kind of get some of those other bodies on board. So the NHS, we all know, they're really kind of tantamount to any of the schemes that we're working on in a town centre perspective, and kind of They provide many of the social infrastructure elements that Ellie mentioned in the previous question. But they are renowned for being a little bit slower than the industry would like, and they have a governance structure that is difficult to get your head around to start off with. That's where we're seeing working in those public-private partnerships really working well, where you can have a multitude of bodies to work with the NHS and other public sectors to bring it to fruition. And harking back to kind of the high street that I mentioned earlier, to have a thriving high street and kind of regenerated town centres across the country, we will need the NHS, we will need other public bodies to step up and take space that has been kind of vacated by the retail.
Mike, good to get your view on this one as well. Like, where is that view of a joined up place delivery? What is it looking like for you guys, and where does that come from?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I think agree with everything that Chris has just said. Really, I think a place-based approach is kind of critical from a social value point of view. I mean, I think as housing providers, we have lots of interface regularly with community stakeholders, such as education and healthcare. And I think we try and see our role as more than just providing homes. We want to ensure that we're effectively supporting our communities to thrive. At Platform, we're looking at developing a design guide at the moment, which not only goes beyond the specification of the units that we're delivering, the homes that we're delivering, but also beyond the constraints of the site. So it's about how our sites, not only how to, I think in development, you often get your focus is on the day-to-day. It's about buildability and planning and the commercial elements of delivering a site. And what can sometimes slip through your focus then is how your scheme integrates into the wider community. And yeah, our design guide is trying to be a place first, delivery second approach, which I know is easier said than done, but it's an aspiration, I think, so that we are delivering. We're not only delivering homes that meet targets, but we're delivering homes that are sustainable and can thrive.
Ellie, I know that sort of place first approach echoes a lot with your work with SLR as well. But from your perspective, I guess this question echoes a lot of what you've said previously around that joined up approach.
Yeah, absolutely. It's shared outcomes, shared evidence, shared sequencing, and having one spatial plan. And I think some of the changes coming out of the new NPPF are going to give us some of the building blocks to do that on a bigger scale, going back to having strategic planning and things like that. That's got to help because you get a much bigger picture. But the key thing is that real partnerships, and both Michael and Chris have already said it, so I'm not going to say it again, but that the partnerships are critical. But also, if we get it right, you get the support of your communities, because rather than them feeling that there's pressure building on local services, etc., and nothing's being done, and they're just getting housing, they can see all the benefits that run with housing and are delivered as a consequence of it, and that's when the system sings, I think, when you bring the community with you.
Great stuff. Well, thank you very much to our panel for their responses today. We will go to them for one more question before we get to our audience Q&A, but please feel free to submit any questions you might have for our panel. We'll get to them in a few moments. We do have our final intel gathering poll for today, so if you could fire that up now, please. So that kind of sector focus looking forward. Where should the sector place greatest focus over the next 5 years? Should it be around accelerating new housing delivery? Is it around refurbishing existing stock to help reach that target? Is it a balanced focus on both, or is it strengthening that cross-sector collaboration? And unfortunately, there isn't an all of the above question, because the response, because I'm sure that would have got about 100% of the respondents from today. We'll give that another few seconds. I can see a few answers still coming in on that one. Excellent. So if we can stop the poll there. So, yep, as expected, there's a view that there needs to be a balanced approach towards the acceleration of housing delivery and the refurbishment of existing stock. 22% saying that the acceleration of new housing delivery is the most important. But interestingly, again, based on what we were just saying a few moments ago, 20% saying that strengthening that cross-sector collaboration is ultimately key to focus on over the next 5 years. So that is our final audience poll. We want to just go to a bit of a wrap-up question to our panel before we go to the audience questions. But if we were, as a group of 4, to reconvene at the end of this parliament, whether the 1.5 million new homes have been hit or not, what must have changed for us to say that the sector truly moved the dial in terms of housing delivery? We'll go to you first on this, Mike, but it'd be good to hear from all of our panelists on this one.
Yeah, thank you. I think we already are seeing positive change. I think some of the things that we've talked about on this session show that the extent of change that's coming in. And I think the 1.5 million has become a headline, hasn't it? I think in terms of a target. My view is it's sort of, if we shoot for the moon, then we might still achieve more delivery than we ever have done before. So I think for me it becomes less about whether or not we hit, exceed, or miss the target. I think it's about what are the outputs that we get over this period. So how many of the 350,000 people that are currently homeless do we give new homes to? How many of the 165,000 children that are in temporary accommodation do we house? How many of the 1.4 billion NHS spend due to poor quality of housing do we manage to save? How many employment opportunities do we create? How many new communities do we build? So it's it's good to have a target, but I think we should look beyond the target and look at the positive outcomes that we're already making and we can continue to make throughout this period.
Yeah, excellent stuff, and that's actually covered off one of the things that I wanted to discuss in the Q&A section, actually, because it is around even if we don't hit the target, then surely it's better to have a plan for building new homes rather than nothing. So
absolutely,
yeah. Chris, your views on this, please. What do you think must have changed if we were to be sitting here at the end of the Parliament to say that that housing delivery has improved and going to move forward?
Really difficult to follow, Michael, with those heavy hitting stats around homelessness and kind of child deprivation. So I'll try to. In my mind, I think we are seeing step change, as Michael said, around kind of planning reform and policy. But I think we probably need to move a little bit more towards partnering. We are seeing at Willmott Dixon a huge kind of benefit of partnering with local authorities, public bodies, but also other developers, so that we can share those requirements and kind of knowledge across the schemes to deliver housing at pace. And I think that's the only way we will truly kind of accelerate delivery, because once you're inside a public body, especially local authorities, it's easy to understand what moves the dial for them on a planning basis and the like. So yeah, for me, a lot more partnering if we're to see an upturn in housing delivery.
Yeah, I'd say a question to you, Ellie. What are we going to be saying in a few years' time to say that we've truly moved the dial?
Yeah, so I think success will mean that the system, the change that we've made to the system can be measured, and that we're not just arguing about, as we just said, that whether we should have a target or what that target should be. I think there's 3 fundamental shifts that are going to be needed to show that dial has actually genuinely moved. One of those we've talked about a lot today is consistent, timely planning decisions, and they need to be supported by properly funded teams. The government have already committed 48 million to this, so hopefully that will happen and it's in train. Also a multi-year stable housing and infrastructure settlement, replacing short-term pots, which again, the more strategic thinking around cross geographies should all be starting to move us in that direction. And a coherent regional land and infrastructure strategy, so that homes are delivered where people need them, with the services they need as well. I also, I've said this before, think that we do need to be looking towards a national house building programme to supercharge supply, as it was in the interwar and post years. And I think that's absolutely fundamental, and next to the other routes to delivering housing that we've got already. And I think if all those things happen, the numbers will just follow. And we'll be building, not just more homes, but better homes, healthier places, and more resilient futures for people. Thank you.
Excellent stuff. Well, some really, really good points there made by our panel, and we'll go into the audience Q&A in a moment and put any of the audience's questions to them. But just a quick poll for our audience to see if they'd be interested in a free procurement consultation on housing delivery. If you are interested, which method would you prefer to be contacted on? We'll leave that poll running for a few moments for our friends in the background to gather some intel on our audience, but it's time from our side for a bit of an audience Q&A. So as mentioned earlier, you can get your questions in through the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we've got around sort of 10 minutes or so to go through those. And to kick off, a question from myself here, based on the polls that we saw earlier, and the one that jumped out to me, I remarked at the time at how balanced the responses were around the challenges that people were seeing. 25% saying funding, 25% saying planning, 31% viability, and the rest saying infrastructure. It shows that there's a balanced set of challenges, but is that actually part of the problem, that there isn't just one really big problem that we've got to fix? It's a plethora of problems. Chris, your kind of view on this, please.
Sorry, Tom, I've had some technical issues. I missed the question.
Oh, I'll tell you what, we'll go to Mike on that one then, and then Ellie afterward, and we'll bring Chris in after that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the 4 points that you touched on, Tom, are kind of probably the 4 cornerstones of delivering housing, aren't they? So, I mean, it's I guess there will always be challenges to delivering these sorts of elements. And I think, we've touched on some really good best practice examples and what's coming in terms of reform. So I mean, I don't know if it's a challenge, if it's more of a challenge that we've got lots of different things that we're talking about today, or whether or not that's just part of the challenge of delivering housing generally. I think it's for every challenge that we've talked about, I think we've been able to find a green shoot of an opportunity or a policy change or a funding stream that's coming forward. So I think we have to take the positives in that, to be honest.
Yeah, and Ellie, I see you nodding away there. It seems to tally with what you've been saying.
Yeah, well, I think I think there are loads of positives to take away from it, and as I keep saying, the government have listened, and where they've perhaps started to go down a policy route, for example, that the industry doesn't think is going to work, they've listened and changed approaches. I think the only challenges, and this is the problem with having lots of different moving parts in this jigsaw to deliver not just housing, all development and all social things, is that some of these things sit in different government departments. So the challenge is that we keep speaking to government about the fact that those different government departments need to be talking to each other to ensure that there's no blockages that are going to come down the line that we haven't foreseen. And I think that's why it's such a complex puzzle to put together. And if they all sat in one department, it'd be much easier. That's the solution.
And Chris, just to reiterate the question, my point was that we looked at the challenges earlier, and they gave it to the audience to put their ideas forward, and it was pretty much equal across the areas of funding, planning, viability, and infrastructure. So my question was, is it better to have a balanced set of challenges across the whole spectrum, or is it that we're better just to have one area that needs fixing?
Yeah, apologies, I had an internet droppage, which maybe missed the question, but it's a really interesting question. But I would say one of the first things you learn when you enter into university in any of the kind of property sectors is it's one of the most complex industries in the world. Now, we are always going to have those challenges, and for them to be balanced probably shows that we're kind of trying to sort them as quickly as we can. I have no kind of alignment to any of the political parties, but it's evident that the government are trying to do what they can. I think this is a structural issue that's been about for probably 2-3 decades, and it's not going to be changed overnight. So they do have the unenviable task of trying to sort it out in 4 years. which I think probably needs a little bit more cross-party kind of alignment and understanding of how we are going to change the housing shortage, because it's not going away. And we've seen there's been a requirement for 350,000 homes a year for the past 50, 60 years, and we've never quite got there. I think we've maxed out about 250. So yeah, it definitely needs a little bit more thinking, but as Michael said earlier, green shoots, and there are some positive signs coming through.
Yeah, that folds quite nicely into what my next question was going to be around the challenge of, you know, a parliament only being 4 or 5 years. This is not a problem that's gone away over the last 20, 30 years, as you mentioned, Chris. So I'll back that back to you, Ellie, and to Mike as well. Is there that need for more of a kind of cross-party approach to this and a better understanding? Because I don't think any one of the major political parties is going to say we don't need to build any more houses. They'll all have a very similar view on it, but obviously there's areas where there needs to be some kind of consensus going forward potentially. Ellie first, and then Mike as well on that one.
Thank you. That's a big question.
I'm not asking you to solve. I'm just asking you to say whether it's something that potentially is required.
I agree. I think there should be cross-party. I mean, that's the only way you're going to do this, is to have policy that is enshrined for more than one parliament, so that you're not chopping and changing. And I've been doing this for a long, long time, almost 3 decades. And we have chopped and changed. We've had so many different policy shifts and so many different approaches. And as you rightly say, Chris, to trying to deliver 300,000 homes for, you know, forever. And it hasn't delivered at this point. My concern is, though, that each party has very different views about how that housing should look and where it should be. And that's what muddies the waters, is the location of housing and the type of housing. Yeah, and that makes it very difficult to get that consensus, I think.
The biggest obstacle, certainly. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Mike, does that tally with your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I've got much more to add, to be honest. I mean, it's as you say, Tom, and as everyone else has referred to, this is a problem that isn't going to go away, isn't it? You know, we've always had this commitment, so and it's clear that everyone wants to solve this housing crisis. So, you know, I think nothing's off the table really. As you know, as much as people can collaborate to try and find a way of creating solutions, the more the better, really. I know that's not a great answer, but I think, you know, that's ultimately what we're here to do, isn't it? Is to deliver high quality housing. So anything that can help with that.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we've talked about already is something that can help with that is that kind of partnership approach. And I know Chris Willmott Dixon's working a lot with Pagabo on the developer-led side of things, and that seems to be a pretty good vehicle for delivering that kind of partnership type approach where you're involving the local authority and also, you know, those key factors like the NHS, schools, etc.
It certainly is, and we've got a number of them around the country now, delivered through Pagabo, and it enables us. Funny enough, one of the big positives for us is it enables us to set up a 10-15 year partnership, which enables us to look through 3 or 4 kind of political cycles. And when we've been discussing the regeneration of these towns with the politicians on both sides, they really see the benefit of that. Of we're going to support this, we're going to have cross-party support, because yes, we might not be in power now, but we might be cutting the ribbon on the first scheme or breaking the ground on the first scheme in 3-4 years' time. So that has been a huge vehicle for us, the Pagabo developer-led framework, and the ability to spread across a number of potential cabinets.
Super. Well, thank you very much to our panel for today's session. Really, really informative. I've very much enjoyed myself just listening to your views on the situation, the challenges that we face ahead of us. So that is unfortunately all we've got time for today. Thank you for tuning in once again. By signing up to today's webinar, you are now automatically part of the Pagabo Live community, which means you will receive a link and a calendar invite for all of our upcoming sessions. There'll also be a newsletter that comes out about a week after each of our Pagabo Live episodes, with a recording of the webinar in video and podcast form, perfect if you need to go to sleep, along with other further insights from the team. You'll also be able to claim a CPD credit for today's session. You'll be receiving an email from the Pagabo team on how you can do that in the coming days. Our next Pagabo Live is actually coming up in just 3 weeks' time. We'll be looking at the Procurement Act 1 year on, some of its impacts with some of our local authority partners, as well as some experts on the Procurement Act itself. But that is all we have time for today. So thank you very much to our panel, to Ellie, to Mike, and to Chris, and to you guys as our audience for your engagement today. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you.